What if I told you that to reach heaven, some people climb a vertical cliff face 650 feet high barefoot with nothing but faith and a rope between them and a fatal fall? In the Tigray region of northern Ethiopia, there's a church that sits impossibly on the edge of a sandstone pinnacle. To reach it, you must climb for 2 hours across sheer drops that could instantly end your journey if you fell. The final stretch? A 50-centimeter wide ledge with a 300-meter drop on both sides. And yet, every single week, mothers climb this cliff with babies strapped to their backs. Elderly men in their 80s make the ascent for Sunday service. Pregnant women scale vertical rock faces to have their children baptized. Why? Because at the top sits Abuna Yemata Guh, a church carved into solid rock 1,500 years ago, housing paintings so perfectly preserved they look like they were created yesterday. A place so sacred, so isolated, that reaching it is considered proof of your devotion. But here's what nobody warns you about when you finally pull yourself over that last ledge, gasping for air, feet bleeding, heart pounding, and you see what's inside, you realize something. This isn't just a church, this is a test. A challenge thrown down by a man 15 centuries ago who wanted to know, how badly do you want to meet God? When you learn the truth about Abuna Yemata Guh, you'll understand that some sacred places aren't meant to be easy to reach. Some doors to heaven require you to risk everything just to knock. Before we begin this journey, if you're drawn to stories of extreme faith, of places that demand everything from those who seek them, of devotion so intense it borders on madness, stay with me. Subscribe to the channel because every week I bring you sacred spaces that push the boundaries of what humans will endure for belief. This isn't tourism. This is pilgrimage at its most raw. Now let's go back to the 5th century. To a time when Christianity was fighting for survival. To 9 men who would change Ethiopia forever. The year is 451 AD. The Council of Chalcedon has just concluded, and the Christian world is tearing itself apart over a single question. Does Christ have one nature or two? It sounds academic. It sounds like theology for scholars. But people are being persecuted over this. Entire communities are fleeing their homelands. Monks are being driven from their monasteries, and 9 of these monks make a decision. They will travel to the one place where their form of Christianity might survive. A kingdom in Africa that adopted Christianity before Rome did. The Kingdom of Aksum, modern-day Ethiopia. Their names were Abba Aragawi, Abba Pentalowon, Abba Guba, Abba Yemata, Abba Aleph, Abba Aphasama, Abba Aphas, Abba Garima, and Abba Lycanos. History calls them the 9 saints. But they weren't running away. They were bringing something with them. The Bible, translated from Greek into Ge'ez, the ancient language of Ethiopia, books of theology, knowledge of monasticism, and most importantly, an unshakable conviction that Christianity needed to reach beyond the cities, beyond the royal courts, into the mountains, the villages, the most remote corners of the kingdom. Abuna Yemata was one of these 9. Some sources say he came from Syria, others say Constantinople. A few claim Rome. The truth is probably lost to time. What we do know is that when he arrived in the Tigray region, he looked at the landscape and saw something no one else saw. The Gibraltar Mountains. Massive sandstone pillars rising hundreds of feet from the valley floor, sheer cliffs. Impossible rock formations. Places where no human had ever stood. And Yemata thought that's where the church needs to be. Now, most people would think this was insane. Why build a church on top of a cliff that nobody can climb? Why make it so difficult to reach? Why create a barrier between worshippers and God? But Yemata understood something profound. He understood that ease breeds complacency, that convenience dilutes devotion, that sometimes the only way to prove your faith is to risk your life for it. Or maybe he was hiding. Ethiopia was safe from the Byzantine persecutions, but that didn't mean it was perfectly safe. Muslim invasions would come. Competing Christian factions would fight. Building a church that nobody could attack made strategic sense. Or perhaps there was a third reason, a spiritual one. The higher you climb, the closer you get to heaven, literally, physically. The journey to God should be difficult because salvation isn't easy. Whatever his reasoning, Yemata chose a sandstone pillar rising 2,580 meters above sea level. At the summit, barely 1,600 square feet of workable space. And he began to carve. Not with modern tools. Not with machinery. With chisels, hammers, his hands, his will. He carved a church directly into the living rock, hewn from a single massive stone. Pillars that were part of the mountain itself. A dome that curved seamlessly into the cliff face. Walls that would never crumble because they were the mountain. The work would have taken years, decades perhaps. Hauling tools up that climb. Working on a ledge barely wide enough to stand. One slip, one moment of inattention, and the consequences would be severe. And when it was finished, when the church was complete, Yamata lived there. For the rest of his life. Alone on that pillar. Praying. Teaching anyone brave enough to make the climb. Translating scripture. Living as close to God as a human being can get while still breathing. When he finally passed away, they laid him to rest in the crypt beneath the church. And the church took his name. Abuna Yemata Guh, Father Yamata's church. For 1,500 years, that church has remained exactly where he left it. Untouched by time, preserved by the dry desert air, waiting for those brave enough, devoted enough, or desperate enough to climb. Let me walk you through what it's actually like to reach Abuna Yemata Guh, because no description can fully capture it. But you need to understand what people endure. You start in Hazan, a small town in Tigray. From there, you drive for about an hour across rough terrain until the vehicle can go no further. Then you walk 30 to 45 minutes across the valley floor in the scorching heat. The pillar you're climbing is visible the entire time, watching you, judging whether you'll make it. When you reach the base, you pay your fees. 150 birr for entry to the national park. 200 birr for ropes. Maybe 100 to 500 birr for a guide, depending on who you ask. And then the guides tell you something that seems impossible. Remove your shoes, not just your shoes. Your socks too. Everything barefoot. Because the rock you're about to climb is holy ground, and you will not dishonor it with footwear. So you remove your shoes, and you look up at the sheer rock face in front of you, and you begin to climb. The first section is deceptive. It's steep, but manageable. Handholds are obvious, footholds are plentiful. You're just scrambling up a hillside, no big deal. And then the angle changes. Suddenly you're not scrambling, you're climbing. Vertical rock. Your toes searching for cracks barely deep enough to wedge them into. Your fingers gripping edges so small they cut into your skin. And below you, the ground is getting very, very far away. The guides are incredible. They know every handhold, every foothold. They position themselves above and below you, calling out where to put your hands, where to place your feet. Sometimes they physically push you upward when your legs give out. Sometimes they pull you when your grip fails. About 30 minutes into the climb, you reach the skeletal remains. Open-air tombs carved into the cliff face. Remains of pilgrims and priests who made this journey and never left. They're not hidden. They're right there, visible, a reminder that this climb has claimed commitment before. Except, according to Father Asafa, the priest who has climbed this cliff every day for 50 years, nobody has ever had a fatal fall here. He swears it. The roots are blessed, he says. Our patron saint saves those who fall with his wind. They are returned to the ledge from halfway down. Whether you believe that or not, you keep climbing. After about an hour of vertical ascent, you reach the stone bridge. A natural formation, maybe 2 meters wide, spanning a gap between rock faces. On both sides, a 250-meter drop. Straight down, if you fall here, there's no second chance. You cross the bridge. On your hands and knees if you're smart. Walking if you're confident or insane. On the other side, there's a wooden footbridge. Rickety, old. Boards that flex under your weight. Another gap with another fatal drop, you cross that too. And then comes the final climb. The one that separates the devout from everyone else. A completely vertical rock wall, no obvious handholds. No clear path. Just slightly darker spots in the stone where people have gripped before you. The guides attach ropes. You clip in if you're lucky enough to have a harness. Most locals don't bother. You climb, your arms shake, your legs burn. Your lungs scream for oxygen at this altitude. And you climb. When you finally haul yourself over the ledge at the top. When you finally haul yourself over the ledge at the top. When your feet touch relatively flat ground, you have exactly 50 centimeters of space between you and a potentially fatal drop. And on that 50-centimeter ledge, you must walk. Slowly, carefully, with your back pressed against the cliff face. One wrong step, one moment of vertigo, and the consequences are severe. At the end of that ledge is a narrow opening in the rock, the entrance to the church. You duck inside, and everything changes. The interior of Abuna Yemata Guh is extraordinary, not just because it exists, but because of what covers every surface. Frescoes, paintings, covering the dome ceiling, the walls, every available space, and they're not faded. They're not crumbling. They look like they were painted last year. The dome shows 9 of the 12 apostles, their faces staring down at you with expressions so lifelike you expect them to speak. The colors are vibrant, reds and blues and golds that shouldn't have survived 15 centuries, but somehow did. On the walls, scenes from the Old and New Testaments. Moses receiving the tablets, the crucifixion, the resurrection, all rendered in a style that's uniquely Ethiopian. Faces in profile, eyes impossibly large, every figure radiating holiness, and in the center of it all, the Black Madonna. The Virgin Mary depicted not as European, not as Middle Eastern, but as Ethiopian. Dark-skinned, unmistakably African. Her child in her arms, both of them surrounded by the 9 saints who brought Christianity to this land. The paintings were created sometime in the 15th century, although local tradition insists they're older. They were made entirely from natural materials, flowers, minerals, fruits, ground into pigments and mixed with animal fat to create paint that has survived half a millennium without significant deterioration. How is that possible? The answer is the location. The church is so high, so isolated, that humidity barely reaches it. The dry desert air has acted as a perfect preservative. No moisture means no mold, no rot, no decay. But there's another element. The church also houses scrolls, sacred texts written on goatskin. The Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, which contains 88 books compared to the 66 or 73 in most Christian Bibles. Books that exist nowhere else in the world. And stone bells, carved from the living rock. When struck, they ring with a pure, clear tone that echoes across the valley below, calling the faithful to prayer. Father Asifa, the current priest, is 64 years old. He has climbed this cliff every single day for 50 years. Every single day. In heat. In wind. In the rare times it rains. He makes this climb because this is his church, his calling, his life. His grandfather was also a priest at Abuna Yemata Guh. His great-grandfather before that. Generations of his family have served this church, and generations are laid to rest in the rocks around it. When Father Asifa passes away, he will be laid to rest there too, added to the remains that line the path. Part of the mountain forever. He speaks about the church with absolute conviction. Upon this rock we are closer to God, not metaphorically, literally, physically. The higher you climb, the nearer you are to heaven. And he insists that the route is blessed. That in 1,500 years, despite hundreds of thousands of climbs, nobody has ever had a fatal fall from this rock. The saint protects them. The wind catches them. God intervenes. Whether you believe, that is between you and your faith. But now we need to address the question that everyone asks. Why? Why do people still climb this? The church is still active. Services are held every week, sometimes multiple times per week, and people come. Not tourists, although a few brave souls attempt it, but locals. Faithful Christians who consider this their parish church. Mothers with babies on their backs make this climb. Pregnant women in long traditional skirts scale vertical rock faces. Elderly men in their 70s and 80s pull themselves up cliffs that would challenge experienced rock climbers. Why? Because faith demands it. Because tradition requires it. Because this is their church, and if you want to worship, if you want to take communion, if you want to baptize your child, you climb. Baptisms at Abuna Yemata Guh are particularly significant. Parents carrying infants up that cliff. The baby has no choice in this. The parents have chosen to risk everything, to test their faith, to prove their devotion by putting their child's life in God's hands on that climb. And when the baptism is complete, when the holy water has been blessed and applied, that child is marked forever. They were baptized in the most inaccessible church in the world, closer to heaven than any other baptism on earth. Now let's talk about the mysteries that surround this place. Because a church this old, this isolated, accumulates secrets. First, the question of construction. How did Father Yemata actually carve this church? The tools available in the 5th and 6th centuries were primitive. Iron chisels, stone hammers, human muscle and determination. But carving a church out of solid rock, 2,580 meters up a cliff face, alone or with minimal help, would take decades. Where did he live during construction? How did he transport tools? How did he prevent himself from falling while working on those narrow ledges? Nobody knows. The logistics seem impossible. Yet the church exists. Some believe he had help. That local converts assisted him, that the community brought supplies and support, that it was a collective effort over many years. Others believe something more miraculous, that angels helped him. That divine intervention made the impossible possible. That God himself guided the chisel because this church was meant to exist. Local legend leans heavily toward the miraculous explanation. Because how else do you explain it? Second, the paintings. Carbon dating and X-ray fluorescence analysis place them in the 5th-10th century. But the church itself dates to the 5th or 6th century. That means the walls were bare for nearly 1,000 years. Why? Why would you build this magnificent church and leave it undecorated for a millennium? The answer might be practical. Paint wouldn't survive the journey up. Artists couldn't work under those conditions. So the church remained plain until someone figured out how to create permanent art in this impossible location. But there's another possibility. The church was decorated earlier and those decorations were lost. Fire, vandalism, natural decay. And the 5th-10th century paintings are actually restorations, replacements for earlier work that didn't survive. We'll never know for certain. The original creators left no records. No signatures, no explanation. Third, who are these people laid to rest in the rocks? The remains visible along the climb route. Father Asifa says none were lost to falling. They all passed away naturally after lives of service. But we don't know their names, don't know their stories. They're anonymous guardians of the path, eternal witnesses to every climb. Some believe they chose to be laid to rest there specifically, that passing away on the rock, being interred in the cliff face, was considered an honor, the ultimate act of devotion. Not just serving the church in life, but protecting it afterward. Fourth, the claim that nobody has ever had a fatal fall. Father Asifa states it as absolute fact. But is it true? Statistically, it seems impossible. Thousands of climbs over 1,500 years. Elderly people, children, pregnant women. Adverse weather, surely someone has slipped. Yet locals insist it's true. They tell stories of people who lost their grip, began to fall, and were caught by an inexplicable wind that pushed them back against the rock. Or who landed on narrow ledges that shouldn't have been there. Or who simply don't remember falling but woke up safe, miracle or folklore. Depends on your worldview. Abuna Yemata Guh has survived events that should have destroyed it. During the Islamic invasions of the 16th century, led by Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, known as Ahmed Gran, Ethiopia was devastated. Churches were burned. Monasteries destroyed. Christian populations faced severe hardship. Ahmed Gran's forces swept through Tigray. They attacked every religious site they could reach. Monastery after monastery fell, but Abuna Yemata Guh, unreachable, they could see it. They knew it was there, but they couldn't climb it, couldn't destroy it, couldn't even deface it, so it survived. Alone among many churches in the region, it remained intact. The Tigray region experienced significant conflict between 2020 and 2022. Buildings were damaged. Cultural sites targeted. Access to many areas became dangerous or impossible. But Abuna Yemata Guh remained. Because even in war, even when everything else is chaos, that cliff is still a cliff. That climb is still impossible for anyone who doesn't know the route. The church has also survived natural threats. Erosion is minimal because the rock is so hard. Water damage is almost non-existent because rainfall is rare and the church is protected by the cliff overhang. Animals can't reach it. Plants don't grow at that altitude on sheer rock. As if Father Yemata chose this spot specifically because nothing would ever be able to harm it. Today, Abuna Yemata Guh faces different challenges. Tourism. As word has spread about the world's most dangerous church, adventurers have started coming, not pilgrims, not the faithful, but thrill seekers. People who want to say they climbed it, who want the Instagram photo, who see it as a challenge rather than a sacred space. And this creates tension. The church is still active, still serving its community. The climb is still a spiritual journey for locals. But now there are foreigners with cameras treating it like an extreme sport. Provides income for impoverished communities. On the other hand, the sacred nature of the space is being diluted. There is also the question of preservation. The paintings have survived this long, but they won't last forever. Increased foot traffic means increased exposure. People touching the walls, breathing humid air into the enclosed space, inadvertently damaging what has survived 15 centuries. UNESCO is considering adding Abuna Yemata Guh to the World Heritage List. If accepted, it would bring international attention and funding for preservation, but it would also bring more visitors. More pressure on the site. It's a delicate balance. Protect the church from neglect, but also protect it from too much attention. So after everything we've explored, let's return to that fundamental question. Why does Abuna Yemata Guh exist? The practical answer is that Father Yemata needed a safe place to establish Christianity in a dangerous time. He needed somewhere invaders couldn't reach, where the faithful could worship without fear. The spiritual answer is that he wanted to create a place where reaching God required genuine sacrifice, where devotion could be tested, where the journey itself was the prayer. But I think there's a deeper truth. Abuna Yemata Guh exists because some things are worth risking everything for. And Father Yemata wanted to create a place that proved it. Every person who climbs that cliff makes a choice. They could stay at the bottom, they could worship elsewhere. They could live a perfectly faithful life without ever setting foot on that rock. But they choose to climb. They choose the danger. They choose the test. And in making that choice, they prove something to themselves. That their faith is real. That their devotion matters more than their fear. That they trust God enough to risk everything. Father Asifa, who has climbed this cliff 18,250 times over 50 years, who will almost certainly pass away while still serving someday, understands this completely. Upon this rock, they are closer to God, not because of altitude, not because of isolation, but because getting there requires you to mean it. In a world of convenient faith, of drive-through churches and televangelist salvation, Abuna Yemata Guh stands as a rebuke. It says, faith should cost you something. Devotion should be difficult. If reaching heaven is easy, you're not reaching heaven. And maybe that's exactly what we need to hear. The church carved into a cliff 1,500 years ago still stands, still calls the faithful, still demands everything from those who answer. And if you've stayed with me through this entire journey, if you've climbed with me from the valley floor to that impossible perch on the edge of heaven, thank you. Sincerely, I know this was long. I know some parts were intense. But I hope you understand now why this place demands our attention. If this story moved you, if it made you question what you're willing to risk for what you believe in, leave your like. Subscribe to the channel because next week I'll bring you another sacred space that challenges everything we think we know about faith. And share in the comments, could you make that climb? Would you risk your life to reach this church? Or does the danger feel like madness rather than devotion? Until the next story. Until the next impossible place. Until we meet again where earth meets sky and faith meets fear. May you find what you're searching for, whatever the cost.